Hey everybody, welcome to Music 499C, Fall 2020, Introduction to Audio Coding with SuperCollider. It's about 10 minutes behind the hour, so if you're rewatching this as a live stream archive, you can skip ahead about 10 minutes to when the class is going to start. Hey Drew, welcome, welcome. I think so. I've got it set to like ultra low latency, but I think it's still about 3 to 5 seconds. Yeah, between when you post something. Yeah, it seems like about 5 seconds between when I do something and when it shows up on stream. Yeah, not ideal, but manageable. Hey Jarvis, welcome. Hey Orlando. Hey Dimitri, hey Deepest Place on Earth. Hey Daisy Stomper. Hey Joshua. Hey Emmanuel. Hey Kane. Hey Amit. We get started in like 3 minutes here. Wait for anyone else who wants to be here to sort of trickle in. Hey Caleb. Hey Eric. I don't know that I have a favorite UGen. Guess it depends on my mood. I don't know. What's your favorite UGen? Hey Casper. Hello Rice. I see Nils. Hey, how's it going? Cool. All right, it's 3 o'clock. Welcome everybody. Let's get started. So this is MUS 499C, Introduction to Audio Coding with SuperCollider. I am your instructor, your host, your spiritual guide, Eli Fieldsteel. And in this class, we're going to be getting to know SuperCollider, which is an audio programming platform and programming environment for sound synthesis, algorithmic composition, and lots of other things. So I just want to plow through some syllabus information real quick. Live streams will be here Thursdays, 3 p.m. Central US time. And I just want to go over a few resources. I've listed some of them here. The main SuperCollider page is supercollider.github.io. You can download it there. I've got a SuperCollider tutorial series on this channel, and in particular, tutorial 0 has in the video description an additional list of more resources. few more things here. This is sort of the main forum, and there's a bunch of code examples you can get here. Sort of no guarantee about quality or functionality, but it's a good place to sort of farm out, sort of rummage for ideas. There's a listserv archive. There's a Reddit page, MIT book, SuperCollider book. Okay, so I have decided to use Piazza, which is it's kind of a platform that aims to replace the discussion board functionality of your existing course module. So this was a recommendation from a student in a previous year. So basically, I've set this up, and I've sort of enrolled all the people who are actually at Illinois. You need a illinois.edu email address to register for this, I think. But basically, if you have any sort of question about the class, about the code, about any of the homework, stuff like that, I've made a bunch of, you just click new post here, and you can do a question, a note, a poll, and you just sort of tag it with any number of these categories I've made, and you can also insert bits of code. So hopefully this is a useful platform, because as we start coding, there's inevitably going to be some questions that come up, and lots of students tend to have the same questions. So it's a good place to go just to ask questions and get answers to them. So I hope you'll end up using it. So that's Piazza. I think I put a link to that in the syllabus, so you can register for it. Pastebin. Pastebin is a service that might be handy for us here. So pastebin.com. And to answer your question, Tetrix, it's going to be mostly the same. I mean, the content's going to be similar to what I streamed in 2019. So Pastebin is a place where you can dump a bunch of code and then make a very quick sharing link. So if I say, here's some code, 3 squared, and then I click create new paste, and then if I just grab this short link that appears in the URL bar, drop it into the chat, then you can all click that, and then you have access to my code, and it works the other way too. So if at any point you're working on code and you think it's supposed to be working and it's not, and there's some downtime in the lecture, you can ask me to sort of check it out and post a short link via Pastebin in the chat, and I'll be able to put it on screen really quickly. What else did I want to talk about? Grade breakdown is here. And for anyone watching who's not actually an Illinois student or registered for this class, I am going to make the homework assignments, the weekly problem sets available. I'll put a link in the video description shortly after the video goes up on my channel. Late assignment policy, and then just a quick look at the course schedule. I see sort of units like 1 through 6 as kind of the basics. And once we get, and then the midterm will sort of cover the basics. It's a 24-hour take-home programming assignment. And then we start getting into some of the more SuperCollider specific stuff like patterns. We'll do some GUI design, talk about OSC. And then because between the last year I taught this class and this year, I've got about 6 or so new synthesis tutorials, so FM, wavetable, granular. I'm hoping that in November we can start to get into some more some of the more intermediate advanced synthesis techniques. So that's it on the syllabus, and let's get into it. So you can download SuperCollider at supercollider.github.io. Click download or just scroll down. And the most recent release on this page is 3.11.0, so you can just download the version for you, and then I actually on the GitHub page, which is github.com/supercollider/supercollider, you can scroll down to releases. Actually, I think the latest release is at the top, which is 3.11.1, just released just about a week ago. And so here you can scroll down and grab whichever version you need, and install it. So let's do that real quick. Yeah. And get rid of these. And you'll get a zip. Well, if you're on Mac, you'll get a zip. And it should give you a folder with the sort of standard vanilla download. And so you can move this folder wherever you like to keep your applications. And just double click the swirly black and white thing to open up SuperCollider. And so I'm going to open that up. So for today, I think we're not actually going to get into any sound, which I admit is a little disappointing. I just want to focus on some of the basics of navigating the IDE, of using the language, how the interpreter works, evaluating code, and just sort of getting comfortable with a lot of the basic programming concepts that will be used and come in handy as we start moving into making sound functions and processing audio and stuff like that. So yeah, if you're watching and following along, you can open this up as well. You should see something like this. I'm going to mess with my fonts a little bit so it's a little bit more visible. And so here's the IDE. It's the development environment where you'll do your coding. So the big white area here, that's your workspace. That's where you type and evaluate your code. By default, in the upper right is the help browser. And so here you can sort of just scroll around. There's a search option where you can just search for oscillator or something like that. We get a whole bunch of results, oscillators. There's a bunch you can browse by category. For example, there's all of these UGens here, and they come in subcategories and subcategories. So these are, deterministic generator UGens, and so lots of fun stuff in the help browser. The help browser is also available, I believe, at docs.sccode.org. I think it's doc.sccode.org. So you can access it through a web browser as well. Okay, and then on the bottom right, this is the post window. This is where error messages are reported. It's where SuperCollider posts information about code you're evaluating. And when you first open SuperCollider, it's maybe not dumping quite as much stuff as it is on mine, but you should see some information, and at least at the very bottom, welcome to SuperCollider, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so right, and then a couple other things you want to know. You can get to the SuperCollider preferences here. Obviously, I'm on Mac, and so things are going to look a little different on Windows and Linux, but I trust everyone will be able to find their preferences dialog. And from here, probably the most useful area is maybe editor, where you can change kind of some basic IDE behaviors. I do recommend wrap text in code editor and wrap text in post window. Otherwise, if you type a long line or a long line appears in the post window, it just kind of goes off the edge of the screen and you have to start scrolling horizontally. And personally, I don't really like that. And then fonts and colors, you can change your font. I do recommend monospaced. I don't really know if you want to be doing programming in a font like Helvetica or something, like you're writing an email. I find monospace is very, very nice for managing code. Everything's nice and blocky. And you can mess around with, like, if you want to change your color scheme, you can do that sorts of stuff. So we're going to go with default, but feel free to do whatever you like. Shortcuts are useful. There's a lot of key bindings by default, and you can scroll through them. There's two in particular I recommend you make a shortcut for if they don't already exist. One of them is boot server. I think I've changed this from the default Command B to be Alt Command B. And quit server. I've made that Alt Command Q. So I do recommend those two at least, but there's lots of keyboard shortcuts and you can sort of rifle through these at your convenience. And another good key binding you'll want to know is how to clear the post window. Now you can right-click on the post window and choose clear, but there is a key binding for that, which you can look up in the key bindings. I think by default it's Shift Command P or Shift Control P. So I'm going to hit that right now, and post window is nice and clear. As you code and like you start evaluating stuff, and if you get some error messages, or just eventually things get pretty cluttered in the post window, and you know, it's just you'll want to. I get in the habit of clearing the post window sort of constantly. So back to the help browser for a second. With the search, you can search for things here. You can also bring up a search window with Shift Command D, which I assume is Shift Control D on Windows and Linux, and you can type stuff and search for it. The browse is useful, and then just to give you a very loose sense of the structure of help file documents, let's look at the help file for array. And most help files will look something like this, where you have the name of the class at the top. You see its class inheritance here, so it's a subclass of arrayed collection, which is a subclass of sequenceable collection. So just so you know, it inherits a lot of behaviors from these superclasses. A brief description about what it is, what it does, and then usually there's a list of class methods as well as instance methods, which are here. We'll talk about classes and instances in just a second. And I mean, that's more or less it. One of the main gripes that I hear for people who are using SuperCollider for the first time is that the help documents are kind of confusing. They're not as helpful as they maybe should be. And to an extent, I sort of agree with that because the help documents are not written as like a tutorial to sort of walk you through the way you're supposed to use SuperCollider and sort of like a how-to and a 1, 2, 3 step-by-step thing, because it's there really is no standard way of using SuperCollider. It's very much a big open sandbox. So the help documents are just kind of documented, you know, traits and attributes and behaviors of classes. So sometimes you'll get some useful information and sometimes not so much, which is part of the reason why I like teaching this, because it's I think it makes a nice supplement to the information that already exists. Okay, so that's kind of the overview. One last thing I want to mention is you can detach and undock these. So if we undock, it's still part of the SuperCollider IDE, but it floats around, and you can tuck it in, like you can tuck it wherever you want, really, just by clicking and dragging that little gray bar around. You can also detach, so it becomes its own window. You can close it, and if you want to get it back, you can go up here to the View menu, Docklets, Help Browser, and here it is again. All right, super. So SuperCollider is an object-oriented programming language. And the object-oriented view of the world is that everything in the language is an object of some kind. And so there's a parent class above everything else called object. And it has some behaviors and methods and traits and things. And those all trickle down. So for example, object has some subclasses like collection, and then collection has subclasses. And so you can think of it as like this tree of information, of objects, and sort of this trickle-down inheritance. For example, array is a subclass of arrayed collection, which is a sequenceable collection of object. So this means any behaviors defined for object are defined for all of its subclasses. Any behaviors defined for sequenceable collection are also defined for arrayed collection and array, but not necessarily collection. So it's sort of functions and methods propagate downward. So in an object-oriented language like this, there are a bunch of classes, which are abstract representations of types of information. So we have, for example, the integer class, the float class, array, string, character, symbol, Boolean, functions, and then lots more. But those are sort of the basic ones. So, arrays, just integers, basically. Positive or negative. Yeah, integers. Floats are numbers that have a decimal point in them. So anything sort of like this. Even a number like this, 4.0. This is a float, even though it's, it's the same value as 4, but 4.0 is considered a different class. Then we have, let's see, strings, which are basically ordered collections of individual characters. Stuff like this. These are often used in SuperCollider for naming things or just labeling things. And so a string is made up of individual characters. So if we want the character H, the way we do that is we precede it with a $sign. So we can have the character, the number 7, which of course is different from the integer 7. What else do we have? Arrays. Arrays are very, very common. So an array is just an ordered collection of things. And those things inside the array can be anything. You see I'm putting some white space in here. SuperCollider is pretty indifferent when it comes to white space. I think people have different sort of practices with how you like to do your white space, whatever looks cleanest for you. I think I'll sometimes put spaces in between individual items, but not so much in the brackets. So arrays are delineated with square brackets. They have a size, and they can contain any type of class or any instance of any class separated by commas. Symbols are also used for naming things, but unlike strings, they don't have a size. They're always size 0. And they can be, if I could spell correctly, they can be delineated this way with a backslash or enclosed in single quotes. So we have string, char, or char. I don't know how to say that one. Array, symbol. We have booleans, which are basically true and false. So the class of these, there's actually a class called true, and the instance of that class is lowercase true and lowercase false for false. These are useful for figuring out if values are comparable, greater than, less than, that sort of thing. And also functions, which are delineated with curly braces. And functions are especially useful for encapsulating bits of code that you may not necessarily want to use immediately, but store and then use later. So it's a way of modularizing your code, sort of encapsulating something in a little function, giving it a name, using it later. Okay, so SuperCollider exists as a collection of many classes. These are just some of the common ones. These are what we call like literal classes, because the appearance of the, this actually is the data itself. You can actually see the number, and you've got the array containing all those things. You can literally see it. They're called literals, as opposed to something more abstract, say like the window class, which is a abstract representation of a graphical window. So for example, we can say, we want to make a new window, w equals window.new. Window is the class, and by saying .new, we're making a new instance of that class and storing it in the container or identifier w, and then we can talk to w, saying .front, which tells that instance of that window to become visible and come to the front. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. So let's look at this syntax here, which is the sort of thing.thing. In SuperCollider, we perform actions and engage with the data by passing messages, also called methods, to objects or classes, instances, just basically things which receive those methods. And so the general syntactical construction looks like this: receiver dot method We always put a semicolon at the end of a statement of code to delineate the end of that line. And there's an alternate syntax you can use, which is method, and then in parentheses, the receiver, semicolon. So let me give you an example. Let's take the, an instance of the integer class, 5. And there is a method, squared, which operates on its receiver by returning the square of that value. So we could also write this squared parentheses 5 semicolon. And now's probably as good a time as any to talk about how we actually evaluate code in SuperCollider. So if we're dealing with a single line, and by single line I mean a sequence of characters unbroken by a return character, we can place the mouse anywhere on it and just click so the cursor is on that line, and then we hold shift and press return. So that gives us 25, and we see 25 returned to us in the post window. And we could just as easily put the cursor on the next line, shift return, and that works just great. So this is the essence of working with data in SuperCollider. We have data that exists as objects, classes, instances, and we pass them methods to operate, to sort of perform behaviors on those. So an example of a method which is defined for object and therefore defined for all of its subclasses is the class method. So if we say for.class, hit shift enter, it says this is an integer. It's a member of the integer class. Do this on string. So we can, you'll notice I didn't put a semicolon on this one or that one, and that's me being sloppy. It's really a good habit to get into, to put a semicolon at the end. But yeah, you can see that its class is a valid method to send to any type of object, and it will tell you, oops, Command Z to undo, that it's an array or a symbol. This is an instance of the true class, which this is a little bit more confusing than it probably should be. But true is the singular instance of the class, capital T, true. And we're saying, what class are you a member of? And it's a member of the capital T, true class. This one here. It's a function, etc. You get the idea. Right, so that's the essence of passing information, receiver.method or method parentheses receiver. And we can evaluate single lines by clicking on them and pushing shift enter. Alternatively, we can click and drag to select some code, and then shift enter will evaluate whatever is selected. Although I find that to be, especially with large chunks of code, you really don't want to be like clicking and dragging and having to scroll up and down. It's pretty tedious. It's not quite, Jarvis, that everything is a class. Everything is everything has a class is more accurate. But there are basically classes and instances. And classes are sort of like the abstract representation of some object, and then an instance is a sort of concrete, tangible instance, for lack of a better word. It's you sort of make an actual piece of data that you can work with from the class definition. Okay, so let's go back to numbers for a second. We have numbers, and we have our basic sort of addition, subtraction. For multiplication, we use the asterisk, division, backslash. So we can do all sorts of things like that. And some common methods for integers and floats are, let's see, we can say, I think I wrote these down somewhere. Well, we can round numbers to sort of the nearest multiple of something using the round method. By default, it rounds to the nearest multiple of 1. And this is a good moment to point out that some methods don't just work by themselves. Some of them do. For example, 5 squared doesn't need any additional information. But the method POW, which is raise this number to the power of something, it needs some additional information. And the way we do this is by opening up parentheses after the method and telling it the number we want to raise it to the power of. So this is 5 to the power of 4. And if we want to rewrite this with the other type of method receiver method syntax, then we could say put the method first, which is POW, and then we put the receiver and then any additional arguments that are needed. So this is ultimately a matter of taste. There's the main reason you might want to use one over the other is because it makes things a little bit more readable. For example, I think in this particular case, 5.pow4 makes a little more sense because it almost reads like 5 to the power of 4. So other common methods, let's see, we can say ABS for absolute value. This just gives us, just the absolute value. So positive or negative, just the positive version of that value. We can do a couple different kinds of division. So for example, if we say 100 divided by, let's do 400 divided by 100. Of course, this is 4. If we say 400.div 100, this basically takes the integer part of the result. And because the result is an integer, it's a 4. But if we say, 430, this is, if we do this with regular division, it's 4.3. So this just takes the integer part of that division. So if we go up to 500, div 100, that's going to give us 5. So .div is just take the integer part of the result. And mod, MOD, is take the remainder part of this operation. So 500 mod 100, well, this 500 divided by 100 is 5, and the remainder part is 0. This gives us 0. 501 mod 100, well, 500 divided by 100. 500 divided by 100 is 501 divided by 100 is 5.01. So this is, excuse me, yeah, 5.01. Yeah, so this gives us, yeah, we have a certain integer number of things and then however many left over. Right? So it goes in there 5 times and then there's one more remaining in here. So it's basically how to get the remainder, not the fractional part, the remainder of the division. Let's see. All right, so let's go to strings for a second, getting comfortable with strings. Let's say hello world with an exclamation point. So strings have size. This is the number of characters in the string. We can do things like reversing the string. This will obviously just flip the order forward to backwards. Yeah, div just drops the remainder. We can also scramble. And so we do this again and again. We're going to get something different every time. We can also, there's a double plus operator, which is for concatenating strings. So if we say hello plus plus world, this is going to return a new single unbroken string, which is the concatenation of these two. And notice in this case, there won't be a space between hello and world because there is no space character. It's just five letters and a punctuation. Yeah, scramble's fun. Has good applications in audio too. All right, so now, okay, so we can say we've got these methods for string. So we know there's like squared and power for numbers and reverse and scramble. So what happens if we do something like 3.873 dot scramble? Like surely this is harmless, right? Oh no. Yeah, so this is welcome to your first error message. Surely no one thought this was gonna like scramble the digits, right? That would be weird. So this is an error message. This is one of the primary functions of the the post window. So the error is at the top. You just sort of scroll to the top. It says message scramble not understood, receiver float 3.873, etc., etc. And then I think you should just ignore everything below this. This stuff is only here to scare you, and scare you it might. But this is really all you need to know. A SuperCollider is saying, okay, so I was instructed to send the message scramble to a receiver, and it was an instance of the float class, and that method is not defined for that class. So that's why it couldn't understand that. Just like we can't say hello dot cubed. That's not going to work either. You cannot cube or square a string. That doesn't make any sense. So there are some methods that are defined for multiple classes. For example, anything defined for object is going to work for everything. And then some methods are very specific to certain classes. And the example that I was told, sort of a analogy here, when I was taking a SuperCollider class back in like 2010, it's like yelling the word fire in a crowded theater versus on a like battlefield or something. It just means two entirely different things. So you just have to be mindful of the fact that methods are defined for certain types of classes, but not necessarily all classes. So that's a pretty common message, error message, whatever, not understood, receiver, something. And it just means that that method's not defined for that particular type of data. Okay. Now let's say we want to do some multi-line stuff, sort of classic programming where we start with some piece of information, and then over the course of several steps, we manipulate that data and then produce some modified result at the end. So this is a case where it makes sense to create a named container or an identifier for something, so that we say our initial value, whatever its name is 5, and then we multiply by 2, subtract 1, whatever. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll just sort of make some space for ourselves here, and we'll say value equals 9. Value equals value times 2. Value equals value minus 1. Now, if we well, there's many things to talk about here, but we know that Shift-Enter is for evaluating single lines of code. And I should add that this makes the SuperCollider interpreter what's called a dynamic interpreter, where some programming environments or languages, you write all your code, and then the interpreter parses it all at once, sort of just top to bottom, the entire code, and runs it. But SuperCollider gives you the flexibility of kind of going through and running little bits as you go, so it's very interactive. So, okay, if we try to run this, it's just not going to work, but that's not necessarily because of the Shift-Enter thing. We're getting a new error here. It says value not defined. And basically the result here is, or the reason for this is that we can't just make up names for stuff, at least not this way. So if we want to use a named container for something, we have to declare a variable. At least that's one way to do it. And we do that with a var statement. And so, we can, even if we run this now, you think, okay, great, we're in the clear. We've declared a variable called value, but we're getting the same problem here. So this var statement is a declaration of what's called a local variable, which, and local variables only have scope within the evaluation, the code evaluation of which they are a part. So if we just run this line, in that moment, that particular evaluation contains the that's the scope of that local variable. So as soon as we finish it, that local variable is poof, it's gone. So what we need to do is evaluate all of these together. So we can click and drag to highlight everything, and then Shift-Enter to run the highlighted code, and that gives us the desired result. And then, of course, now that value had scope within the context of that evaluation. So SuperCollider, the interpreter, remembered that value is a little thing that we saved for ourselves, and we're setting it equal to 9, then setting it equal to itself times 2, and then setting it equal to itself minus 1, and we get the end result of that evaluation in the post window. And so now value is gone once again. We just can't use it anymore. And I think a better way to evaluate multiple statements of code is to enclose them in parentheses. And this is a really useful trick. This comes up all the time because very rarely is your entire project just individual lines of code. You often want to put a bunch of things in a clump like this. And so now the keystroke changes. It's not Shift-Enter anymore. If you're on Mac, you just click somewhere within these single-line parentheses and press Command Return. And if you're on Windows or Linux, it's Control Return. And these parentheses act as sort of guardrails. So it knows, OK, we're just going to evaluate everything in here. So it goes through and does that. And then still, once again, value is no longer defined. So doing a local variable declaration with a var statement is useful if you just want these sort of one-shot containers that I just need to calculate a thing once and get the result. Alternatively, if we want a more permanent container to store things, we have two options, basically. We can precede the name of the container we choose with a tilde. And this effectively creates something we can consider to be a global variable. So we can even now do this one line at a time. Value equals 9. Now value equals value times 2. And now it's equal to that value minus 1. And we can go over here and say, oh, great. It's still 17. We can even open a new tab with Command N and say, hey, by the way, what was the value again? Oh, it was 17. So this is sort of a semi-permanent thing. If we quit and reopen SuperCollider, it'll forget all of these. So that's one option. The other option is to use a single character lowercase letter. So you basically have 26 options here. These single character lowercase alphabetic characters, these are basically reserved for this purpose. So this would work as well. So now V is 17, and so the other ones A, B, X, whatever. We haven't used those yet, so they're nil, which is the value given to things that don't yet have a value. So when you're working, you sort of have to ask yourself, am I just doing a little sort of small calculation that's only relevant here and nowhere else? If so, you should declare a variable. But if you want to use something that you can keep track of over a longer period of time, it's good to use the tilde for the global variable or a single lowercase. I tend to prefer this option because you just cannot be very expressive with the meaning of this. Like, what is V? Is it volume? Is it velocity? You have no idea. So this way you can actually make a sort of word here. The only main rules here is that it can't start with a capital letter. That is not allowed. And it can't start with, like, I think symbols and stuff. So it's got to start with a lowercase letter. But after that, you can do capital letters, numbers, underscores. Yeah, that's totally fine. Just got to start with a lowercase letter. That's the only thing. All right, so that's local variables versus global variables. It's an important concept, but it's the kind of thing that I think will come kind of naturally as we start getting into more code. All right, so we were talking about basic methods, sort of plus, minus, times, divide, etc. Let's talk about the comparative operators real quick. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, S. I should mention here. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but S is considered sort of special in that it by default it keeps a reference to the audio server, which is the part of SuperCollider that does all the audio processing. So there's nothing stopping you from overwriting S, but generally you should avoid using S. It'll just be easier if you don't use it. Yeah. All right. So comparative operations, there's I think 6 of them. There's so let's see, 3 greater than 2. This is a conditional, or it's a comparative expression. It's basically asking a question: is 3 greater than 2? Well, yes, of course it is. Is 3 greater than 3? No. Okay. So these 6 operations are greater than, less than. Is equal to, which is a double equals. If you do the single equals, this is like saying set 3 equal to 2, which is complete nonsense. So The double equals is the sort of equals with a question mark over it. Is this equal? There's greater than or equal to, which is, I think there is the, if you know how to make this character, you can go ahead, but that's not going to work. You have to do greater than equals. That's greater than or equal to. So this is less than or equal to, and then not equal to. So 3 greater than 2, yes. 3 less than 2, no. Equal, no. Yes, it is greater than or equal to. It's not less than or equal to. And is 3 not equal to 2? Well, yes, that's true. So these come into play a lot if you are doing conditional statements. So let's talk about the method if. And let's just dip back into the help browser here. You can just click on any method or class or anything and just press Command D or Control D on Windows and Linux. And that will bring up sort of matches for that. So I happen to know that if is located in control structures, which is your if, for, while, stuff like that. I just want to talk about if for right now. So if is a method that operates on Booleans, instances of the Boolean class. So basically, they expect some sort of conditional statement which returns true or false. So we could say, x equals, let's say 10.rand. And this is going to give us a random integer between 0 and 10, I think, not including 10. So let's make a multi-line thing here. And we'll say x.rand if. There's 2 ways to do this. We'll do it with, we're going to do it with the method parentheses receiver. So the method is if, and if needs 3 things, right? So the receiver, which is the check, so we can say x greater than 5. And we're going to sort of multi-line this a little bit here. And then it needs 2 more things, and these are going to be functions to be evaluated if true or if false. So if it's greater than 5, we'll say greater than 5. And if not, we'll say not greater than 5. Right. So we've got our initial line here where we set x equal to a random value, and then we send the if method to the receiver, which is the conditional statement x greater than 5. And then if needs to know what to do if true and what to do if false. So not greater than 5, greater than 5. Be nice to know what value we're actually getting. So there's another method here which is defined for object and therefore defined for every subclass of object, and that is post ln. This is like your primary debugging debugging method. So basically this will just this causes that whatever the receiver is to be posted in the post window. So here you can see there it gets posted, right? So that 4 is not greater than 5. And Drew, to answer your question, not necessarily. You don't have to be super experienced with code. I mean, this first class here is just designed to kind of get into the shallow end with just the basics of expressing yourself, expressing values, and setting things equal to other things, and performing basic operations with data in programming languages. So this conditional check will come up quite a bit. Happens. I think it's a fairly common thing to happen when you're working with audio. If you're sort of generating random values and you want to only use certain ones in synthesis functions, like only if they're within the range of audible frequencies or something like that. And let me go back for a moment to, this is a sort of quirk of SuperCollider. So let's take the expression 6 times 3 plus 2. So take a moment and, what about the one that includes not greater greater and equal. I don't think those are here. Greater and equal. These are the 6 that I am aware of. If there are more, I'm not aware of them. So 6 times 3 plus 2. This should be 20, and it is. So now let's imagine 2 plus 6 times 3. So take a moment to guess what this should be equal to. I mean, if you think back to, and an or. Well, there are methods and an or, and there's also the double ampersand and the double pipe, which I'll come back to those in just a second. So this, you might expect this to be 20 because multiplication comes before addition, but not in SuperCollider. SuperCollider will sort of seize this as something that, this is imaginary code, but it sort of sees it like something like this. It'll attempt to just do these operations left to right. So it ignores order of operations, which can land you in some hot water, but you can always enclose things in parentheses if you want those operations to happen first. And I'm going to try to tie in the double ampersand and the double pipe. Let's see. So in the same sort of discussion here. So let's go. An if condition that takes into account not greater, and also informs about equal. Not sure. Let's do, let's make an X and a Y here. So we want to make sure both of these are greater than 5. So we only want to say both greater if they're both greater. So here we would say something like and y greater than 5. Now, I have a feeling this is going to produce an error message. Not both greater, or it's gonna give us strange behavior. Okay, so there's an error. It's saying message greater than not understood, receiver false. And this is the exact same problem we just saw here, where SuperCollider goes, okay, x greater than 5. I know what that is. That's either true or false. And then it says and y, which is not true and not false, because that's a number. And so that's the source of that error. This ampersand, double ampersand, is checking this condition and that condition, but it's going straight left to right. So the solution here is to put both of these in parentheses. So not both greater, not both greater, not both greater. Yeah, so that that's sort of, this is a good habit to get into when you're doing and. And if you want to do or, just so one or both of these needs to be true, you can do this double pipe. The text here is very confusing. So. At least one greater. Yeah, so neither is greater than 5, neither is greater than 5, neither is greater. There we go. So at least one of these was greater than 5. So if we get something like 7 and 0, then this one here, right? X was 7, so this is true. Y was 0, this is false. But the OR operation is, if at least one of these is true, then return the true function. Luis, there is there's the SuperCollider book, which was written, I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe not quite that long ago, but yeah, I think it's published under MIT Press. All right, real quick, I want to talk about functions. This is so basically we are, as I said, functions are curly braces. Right? So we're going to make a little global variable here. And, we'll say something like var val val equals 5, val equals val plus 2, and then we'll evaluate this function. And what we get is, see, there you go. Forgot a semicolon. All right. That's why we got that error message. So this is just a function. And then to evaluate the function, we say func.value. And so when we evaluate a function, it actually goes in and says, okay, now it's time to do this code. And often we don't, you know, this is a fairly useless function because, you know, it just does one thing. So sometimes we might want to pull a value into a function and then sort of do something with that value and then output some new value based on that input. And, you know, like a little sort of magic box where it has an input, something happens, and something comes out. So we're going to make a similarly stupid function here, and we need to declare an argument. It's similar to doing a variable declaration, but the arg statement is slightly different. It basically allows us to feed a value into this function. And so we'll call this output, and the output is going to be input plus 2. Right. So there we've got another function. And now if we say function.value, we get an error because we say message plus not understood, receiver nil. So input doesn't have a value. So we need to pass a value to input so that we can feed it into this function. And the way we do that is basically the same way we did, what was it? 5 to the power of 4. Right? We say, give me that function and evaluate the function, passing in the value 11. If we evaluate this, we get 13. So this is sort of the basic operation of building little building blocks, these little functions that perform modular tasks, and then you can sort of feed them in. And functions always return the value of the last line, which means if we say, k equals function.value 11, then we've stored that value in k. All right. Well, there was a little bit more I wanted to get to, but I've covered 80–90% of what I had planned. Time always sort of flies. So I know this first lecture is always a little crazy, depending on your programming experience. Some of this might look really new, and if you have some programming experience with other platforms, this might look pretty bonkers as well. But the main point here is to just get comfortable with the very basic operations of creating pieces of information in SuperCollider and doing basic operations with them. So I'll put a homework assignment up. I'll put a link to it in the video description when this goes up. And so everyone's welcome to sort of take a look at that and hack your way through it. What I wanted to do today was also get to iteration, sort of operating on a collection of things rather than individual things. But I suppose we'll save that for next time. All right, so these streams are just going to be just short of an hour, just because class is 50 minutes. I've already gone a little bit over. But I hope this was enjoyable for everybody, and I will be here again same time next week. So thanks everybody for watching. Really appreciate everyone stopping by. For all of the sort of formally enrolled Illinois students, of course, you're welcome to send me an email. If you want to meet, let me know. And yeah, next week, try to tidy this up, just get to a little iteration. And I hope the homework assignments will kind of explain concepts as well as provide a few challenges. And then next week, I think we'll actually start our engines and boot the audio server and start making some tones. So thank you all for all the thank yous and for stopping by. And yeah, having fun. So thanks again one more time, and see you all next week.